I'm sure everyone in the family has that one relative about whom nothing bad can be said, but if you look at it that way, he is strange. I have one of those, Uncle Slava. He walks all the time gloomy, tries not to make unnecessary conversation with anyone. I see him on holidays often. He sits, drinks, and while everyone is celebrating, having fun, gossiping lively about some of their acquaintances, he all sits, looking around sometimes, as if trying to look for something. I remember once, when we were celebrating another holiday as a family, where even the most obscure and distant relatives gather, Uncle Slava got drunk, and in some century he decided to tell a story from his youth, a story that, according to him, divided life into before and after. Here's what he said. I was about 15, 16 years old. I had my own company from school then. We always went together. What kind of shit we did not do. What kind of trouble we did not get into. But everything was nothing. Youth. And when school was over that year, we decided to go to one of our guys in the summer to go to the middle of nowhere, to visit his summer house, to stay with him, to walk around the neighborhood, to find adventures. We were small, reckless, youthful maximalism was in full play. But who knew that everything would turn out completely differently? It should not have been so simple. We gathered in one of the first days of June, early in the morning, packed our things, put everything in bags and backpacks. We walked through the neighborhood. It was warm and sunny. We got to the station, took an electric train to the station nearest to our friend's village. We had a long ride, had time to have lunch with the food we had taken on the road. Finally, the cherished name of the station was heard from the speakers in the car. My guys and I were instantly revived, and in a few minutes we were standing on the platform. There were practically no people. Civilization did not even smell. A real wilderness. As we walked to the station exit, Jack, the oldest of us, caught a glimpse of a notice. Missing. Please provide any information. Jack read aloud the caption on the ad with a photo of a girl apparently our age. Come on, keep up, Kevin shouted cheerfully to our companion, or we won't get to my house until tonight. Jack, distracted by the paper on the wall, came up alongside us and asked Kevin, "You know that girl from the ad?" Kevin shook his head cheerfully. After that, we didn't talk much on the way, so we could exchange small phrases, joke at each other, but without much activity because everyone was already tired and it was still a long way to go. They got there by 6 o'clock. Kevin opened the gate with his key and with a sly smile said, "Welcome to our tent. Come on in, gentlemen." Once inside, we took the beds, laid out our belongings and changed clothes, and then started doing all the chores on the property and in the house. By evening, finally, the work was done, and now, having fried shish kebab in the cleaned and cleaned house, we sat down at the table and under stories, songs, and gossip, sharpened hot shish kebab, drinking it with cheap store alcohol. Having had enough of yelling, getting drunk and drunk, we scattered to our rooms. We slept as peacefully as ever. The next day we decided to go to the local river for a swim. So we did. And in the middle of the day, we were already sitting in the water and discussing everything that could be discussed and what could not be discussed too. We came back in the evening because it was too good in the water, so we stayed out too long. We were walking along a path through the forest. It was getting dark. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, something suddenly roared, as if an elephant was being torn apart. And the worst thing was that the source of this terrible roar was moving in our direction. "Let's run! Quick!" Jack hissed through gritted teeth. We ran for a long time, exhausted, but we kept on running, our lungs burning as if they were being roasted on a fire, each breath bringing more pain than strength. But we couldn't slow down, and as if in a fog, we kept running and running, and finally the houses appeared. We, frightened, quickly ran to the plot, slammed the gate for the whole village, ran into the house, and closed the door on all locks, turned off the light and looked out the window. They sat like that for 2 hours, watching the poorly lit street and looking out from the forest for the slightest movement. There was no roar, but fear still had a sticky grip on us, not letting us lose our vigilance. We could fall asleep only by dawn when the roosters sang. The next few days were spent on the plot, devoting our time to socially useful work in the vegetable garden and in the house. Time passed in a measured fashion, and so the days went by, in routine and peace, during the day in the vegetable garden, in the evening inside the house with a cup of tea and good company. Soon the horror of that night wore off, and we started walking around the neighborhood again. And one day, we decided to go mushroom picking deep into the pine forest, which the locals called Deaf. And this forest contained something unnatural, something that could not be explained. We gathered a little before noon, having packed a small snack and equipment in the form of sharp knives. The forest greeted us in an unfriendly, threatening way. The pine trees spread their branches in a dense formation, blocking the sunlight. It was damp and gloomy in the forest, but fortunately, mushrooms were often found. Mostly, they were strong hogs, butter mushrooms, and porcini. While our company was cutting whole glades of mushrooms with excitement, we never noticed how far we had managed to go into the forest. There was still enough time before sunset, and we were in no hurry to return with buckets of booty, not even collecting new mushrooms, but just exploring the forest for anything unusual. And soon we heard Henry's inviting shout nearby. "Guys, come over here!" Intrigued by our comrade's find, we quickly ran up to the shout. In front of us was a huge hill, clearly man-made, with a concrete sewer tunnel on one side. At the entrance to the tunnel was a grated door made of rebar, torn from its hinges, and near it lay a lock. And then I was possessed by the wildest animal horror. This strange structure should not be here. It is so wrong, contrary to the very rules of this world. Well, what kind of collector, in a forest far from civilization, and even the tunnel leads it down? Guys, it should not be here physically. It is all wrong. Its kind, location. Everything is wrong here. I babbled in fear. I have a bad feeling. We need to get out of here, and quickly. But my friends did not really share my point of view at that moment. They, on the contrary, were seized with excitement and desire to see where this strange construction leads. Maybe it's a bunker, or a secret development that's been suspended, said Jack, who had long been interested in architecture. The rest of the guys cheered up and filled with the same enthusiasm as Jack. But I didn't want to go there at all. I couldn't even objectively understand why. My companions were waiting only for me, and I had no choice but to join the vast majority and overpower myself. We began to advance down the tunnel. It led forward, deeper into the ground, slightly at an incline. With each step, the air grew damper and heavier, and the surroundings grew darker. Thankfully, Kevin had brought a flashlight with him in case we had to return after dark. It illuminated the path in front of us, dispersing the thickening darkness. We walked like this for about 10 minutes, and the tunnel was still slow to end. But after about 5 minutes, we came to a room that looked like a fork. There were 2 other tunnels in front of us. As I sniffed, I noticed a strange odor. Fear began to slowly return to me, trying to make me run out of here and get the hell out of this damn place. I fought the fear as best I could. but I still asked, "Can't we get out of here?" The response I got was judgmental looks. "You're scared of some dead animal," Henry replied. The word beast was running through my mind at that moment. No matter how many times we walked in this forest, we didn't see a rodent the whole way, and it was too quiet the whole way. Strange. But despite the fear and caution coming from my gut, I overpowered still youthful maximalism and unwillingness to conflict with comrades on an empty place. Having calmed down, I moved forward, giving my comrades a sign that I was not afraid to go further. As we moved along one of the tunnels, we came to a sort of collector, but there were no other tunnels or pipes, and the strange odor was very strong. And then Kevin's flashlight revealed a dark object lying against one of the walls. For a few seconds, we stood staring at the object, not realizing what it was. Suddenly, we realized what the object was. It was the rotted corpse of that girl from the missing persons notice, covered in places with some burnt hoses and wires. That's what was the source of that odor. Jack screamed at the top of his lungs in horror, the scream echoing through the tunnels of this strange place. And then something happened that was imprinted in my memory for the rest of my life. In the distance, the same roar we had heard a few days before came from the tunnel. I remember how we froze in horror and silently watched that unknown creature from the darkness of the tunnel moving towards us. And what appeared in front of us from the darkness, captured by the beam of Kevin's flashlight, was simply impossible to understand, realize, and accept. It should not simply exist in our world. I wanted to believe in the unreality of what was happening until the last. A tall something, humanoid in shape, literally consisting of all kinds of wires, hoses, and tubes intertwined with each other, slowly appeared from the tunnel, as if enjoying our helplessness and stupor. It was the source of that deafening roar that we heard then, and hear now, standing before it, in its domain. The creature made a leap, fell to the cold concrete, and seemed to braid itself around Henry, who screamed and twitched, realizing that this was the end of his life, that he would never come back from this cold concrete crypt. The creature wrapped one of the bundles of wires around Henry's neck. There was a deafening crunch, and the screams became nothing but wheezes and gurgles. The creature, holding our comrade's struggling body with a bundle of wires, began shoving one of the hoses into his mouth. And then, as if realizing the fate prepared for us, Jack, Kevin, and I snapped out of our seats, and with wild cries and wails rushed to the exit. Our chests burned like hell, and we ran, stumbling and getting up, while the roar began to approach us again. And there was a fork in the road. At one point, something burned my leg. I stumbled and realized that something was holding my ankle, preventing me from breaking free and running there. Toward the light, toward a world so familiar and explainable. No, I mustn't stay here, went through my mind. I acted as if in a fog. I grabbed my small but sharp knife from my pocket and stabbed at whatever was holding me. My arm was drenched in some stinking sludge. But my leg was free. A second later, I was running down the tunnel, upward, guided by the distant light from my companion's flashlight. I was running toward freedom, toward this world that I had said several times that I hated. But now, I realized how precious life was, and how I didn't want to die. And I ran with all my legs, ignoring the deafening roar behind me, ignoring the pain in my throat and lungs. I ran to live. In those moments, it was as if time had slowed down, and I felt as if seconds had turned into eternity. Suddenly, I felt a warm breeze greeting me, caressing my hair, and giving me the strength to keep running. Soon after the breeze came the light, the warm light of the summer sun. I could already see the exit and the silhouettes of my friends running. Freedom was so close. One last push, and I was free. The light blinded me with its brightness, and I fell on the soft grass, exhausted from the chase, panting and wheezing. Beside me lay my comrades, just as tired and wheezing, but alive. They did not remember Henry at once. Probably from the experience and fatigue, After lying on the grass, we got up. We were in the same clearing, but the unfortunate hill was nowhere to be seen. My ankle hurt like hell, and I slumped to the ground almost immediately after climbing up. When I lifted my pant leg, I saw a large laceration contaminated with some black, viscous slime. I had to get it treated quickly, and it was a long way from home. I was taken under my arms, and we walked as fast as possible. Despite the fatigue and thirst, it was good that we reached the village by daylight. We cleaned my wound and began to pack, so that tomorrow, on the first train to leave as soon as possible to the city, to civilization, to people. We had just finished packing and turned out the light, as suddenly from the direction of the forest came that roar again. We lurched, silently and immovably watching the street through the window. The dim light of the lantern brought out a shadow. It was it. It was walking down the street, making those sounds and throbbing. The disgruntled grunts of Victor, the local alky, could be heard from the neighboring lot. Victor didn't like loud noises, so he quickly showed up on the street with a half-empty bottle of beer. A couple minutes later, seeing the inexplicable thing in front of him, he started yelling all over the street and running back to the lot. But it was too late. In an instant, the creature threw a bundle of hoses, tubes, and wires like a snare in his direction, and hitting its target, pulled the big man to itself as lightning fast as if he were a fluff ball. He tried to resist, but the creature enveloped him with more and more bundles of its peculiar body, and in the end, the barely resisting man was dragged somewhere deep into the forest. His screams, so loud and desperate, were heard for about 10 minutes more, and then all was quiet. So they sat there until dawn, afraid to move. In the morning, we were already at the train station with packed things. We got to the city quickly. Later, there were long legal proceedings in our direction on the part of Henry's mother. It was possible to understand her grief and despair, because no one is ready to lose a son, and no one knows how. We did not tell her about the creature, for none of us wanted to go to the nut house, so we had to make up a version that we had gotten lost in that unfortunate forest and had been attacked by a bear, which had dragged away our companion, as if even search parties were sent to those forests, but they found no trace. But luckily, we were not punished for it, and we kind of got away from the story. But it was very difficult to sleep at first, because I kept dreaming of tangles of wires and hoses, tangled, moving, alive. They moved like worms, swarming, pulsating. But the dream stopped after a few years, and we didn't remember these events with the guys. Life went its way without slowing down, and now it all seemed to have almost come to naught. And that situation was almost forgotten, erased from life. But recently, as usual, walking in the park in the neighborhood, in the distance, I noticed a hill in a place where it should not be. Saying the last sentence, Uncle Slava turned pale and was silent for a second. "Okay, little thing, I have to go. After all, I have to work tomorrow," said the uncle, and headed into the hallway. That was the last time I saw him at family gatherings. And the story seems like drunken nonsense. But there was one interesting detail. As he was putting on his shoes, I saw a pale and uneven scar on his ankle. Uncle Slava noticed my gaze and quietly said, "You know, little thing, if you ever see in your life something wrong, illogical, strange, dangerous, something that clearly cannot exist, something that does not fit into the laws of this world, just run. Run fast from there and don't look back. Don't make a mistake. Because some things must remain under the cover of mystery." As usual, I was sitting in a popular social network and sipping on alcoholic energizers I bought today. You know, this is the kind of thing that, if consumed in the right proportions and at the right time, has an incredible effect. For example, if you drink a couple of cans of Revo to watch a horror movie, then with a probability of 95% will dream incredibly realistic horror. Not immediately, of course. At night, you will still suffer because it will be possible to fall asleep only after a couple of hours. So, back to that night. I was chatting with an acquaintance on a social network, talking about all sorts of paranormal phenomena, mysticism, etc. We started talking about unusual and scary incidents that had happened to us. Alcohol hit my head. Adrenaline was playing in my blood. I wanted to tickle my nerves. We told each other about all sorts of nonsense. Finishing the second can, I asked my acquaintance why he was silent. I can't give the exact answer. After that evening, I deleted all correspondence with him, so I'll retell our dialogue from memory. You may not believe me now. I refuse to believe myself. It's too much like a cheap horror movie. I went into the kitchen to make a couple of sandwiches and some tea, and I heard screaming outside. I looked out the window. There was some kid chasing adults and kids, and they were running away. At first, I thought it was a game and turned away to put the kettle on. Then there was such a loud cry of horror that I shuddered, quickly looked out the window, and almost fainted. There was a woman lying in the snow without one leg. This severed leg was dragged by the very kid from whom everyone was running away. He leisurely went to the table in our yard, sat on it, and started eating the leg. I was afraid to call the police. I thought the neighbors had already done it. I'm scared. While I was looking out the window, the kettle boiled on the stove, and that kid looked in my windows. I quickly turned off the lights and locked myself out. Me. Take a picture of him. Also tell him that instead of eyes, he has huge black hollows, and instead of normal teeth, fangs. At this, our dialogue ended as the acquaintance stopped answering and reading messages. A few minutes later, I was already doing my own thing. I turned on the music louder, played GTA, and then there was a video call. When I exited the game, I was surprised. It was the same acquaintance calling, for the first time. Either it was the energy drink, or I just got cold feet. But I rejected the call. A couple seconds later, I got a message. Answer, freak. I was taken aback, since we were not close friends with this acquaintance and had never even jokingly called each other names. Deciding that it was better to be away from sin, I turned off the computer and went to dinner. I lived with my parents in a one-bedroom apartment. I slept that night, not just badly, but very badly. I had a dream that made me wake up in a cold sweat. I dreamed that I woke up in the morning, went to the kitchen, and there on the stove is a pan with fried potatoes and cutlets. On the table there was money and a note written in my mother's handwriting. Uncle got sick. We went to the village for a couple of days. We couldn't wake you up. Don't skip work. Kisses. There was nothing surprising in the fact that they left the note. In the village, there was no communication at all, and the parents had problems with mobile technology. They could not learn how to use it properly. Then immediately evening came. I sat at my computer again with a can of energy drink and logged on to social media. There was a heartbreaking scream outside. I went to the kitchen because I have a room with a balcony full of washed clothes, and the windows in my parents' room face the other side. I looked out the window. Some kid, about 12 years old, had torn off a man's leg and went somewhere deep into the yard, dragging his leg behind him. I was dumbfounded, remembering the story of an acquaintance. Suddenly, the kid turned around and looked through my windows. Then I found myself in the hallway, trying to open the front door. When I opened it, I saw a cute little girl about 6 years old. She smiled and asked in a sweet voice, "Can I rip your leg off, you bastard?" At that, her smile stretched somehow unnaturally wide, right up to her ears. In the next instant, I felt a wild pain. I was lying on my bed, and my arms and legs were being torn off. I woke up in a disgusted state, either because of the dream or because I had felt that pain. With a heavy head, I went to the kitchen. The apartment was unaccustomedly quiet. There was a pan of food on the stove, and money, and a note on the table. I almost fainted. The note said the same thing as the one in my dream. There were fried potatoes and cutlets in a skillet. I quickly got dressed and went to work to share all the weirdness with my friends. At work, of course, they laughed. No one believed me. They refused to visit, however, on the grounds that they were busy. On my way home, as usual, I bought 2 cans of energy drinks and sat down at the computer. I went online, and there were dozens of messages from the same acquaintance waiting for me. The messages were along the lines of, "Answer me, asshole. We'll come to you. We know you know." I got scared and erased all the messages, then sat down to write this text. When I went to the kitchen to smoke, I heard a heartbreaking scream. With a heavy heart, I looked out the window and was almost not surprised at what I saw. There was a man on the ground with his leg torn off and there was a kid standing near him, looking right at me. For 2 minutes now, there has been persistent ringing and knocking at the door. I don't know how it will end, but just in case, goodbye. It was in the fall. John had been on the road for 2 days with 2 companions who were much older than him. They were not having much luck, and fatigue was already making itself felt. The hunter's spirits had fallen, but then the older man remembered about some grandfather he knew who lived nearby. So they went there. Grandfather Alexander received the guests cordially. Apparently, it was not often that a man pleased him with a visit. He took care of the bath, set the table. After drinking some alcohol, the hunters started talking. They began to recall different cases, to tell jokes. John, in order to keep up, also put in some words. In short, the evening flew by. We were about to go to bed when the old man hesitated and showed that he was going to say something. "You guys," he finally squeezed out, "when you go back after the weekend, come and bury me. It won't be Christian without a grave." The hunters laughed. A big grandfather, but he remembered about death. "I feel that I'm going to die. By God." Alexander crossed himself. "You'll get a grandmother, mark my word." The elder embraced the old man and led the whole team to the side. The whole company fell asleep to the howling of the wind outside the window and the ticking of the clock. In the morning, having thanked the grandfather and left him 2 cans of smokeless powder, the hunters went further. The time passed quickly. To be honest, John did not remember his grandfather Alexander and his gloomy words. Only then the old man's request sprang into his memory when fate threw him and his companions into those places again. True, they reached the lonely hunter's cabin, not in November, as promised, but 3 months later. As they skied up to the gate, all 3 of them got a little scared. A strange premonition was dictated by the fact that not a single ski, toboggan, or footprint led to the house. When they opened the door with difficulty, they were surprised to see that there was no light in any of the windows of the log hut or in the barn. The silence was broken only by a gaunt, disheveled dog who glumly climbed out of his box and growled at the uninvited guests. The hunters took off their skis and entered the hay. When they opened the door to the upper room, they felt the cold inside. An unpleasant odor swirled in the air. "Alexander," the older man called out and struck a match. The hut was cold, the walls were covered with glistening frost, and there was snow on the floor. Without knowing why, John pulled the trigger of his gun. "Don't spoil it," the older man said, and as if ashamed of his momentary timidity, he stepped first into the large room. A low shriek was heard at once, and there was nothing to be ashamed of. In the middle of the room, on a table, in a poorly made coffin, lay the master. He had been lying there for a long time. His beard was disheveled, and the nails that had grown on his stiffened fingers looked like the claws of an unseen beast. "Grandpa died that way." The older man scratched the back of his head. The old hunter's fright was gone, and his confidence returned to him. "Now, Mason, John, take your grandfather and get out into the yard. I'll go find a shovel and a crowbar. We've got to bury him before daylight." The grave took a lot of work. The frozen ground wouldn't budge. Toward the end, the artillerymen were exhausted. John, as the youngest, was sent to stoke the furnace and warm the hut for the night. At tea and supper, the conversation did not go well. Something was weighing on all 3 of them, and they did not want to say fussy words. "A monument or a cross, of course." John hesitated. "You can't have a cross without a cross, I guess." "We'll do that in the morning." Mason shook his head and showed his bloody palms. They decided to sleep together, pushing the 2 wooden beds together. They threw rags on the mattress, put backpacks under their heads, and covered themselves with fur coats. Slowly, the warmth took over their careless rookery, and sleep replaced fatigue. John woke up from an incomprehensible fear. No, he had dreamed nothing of the kind. Listening to the silence, he could detect nothing. Nearby men were sniffing heavily. The silence was so quiet that... Stop. It was the silence that probably confused him. The clock didn't strike. Of course, how did he not realize it before? John smirked self-critically and was about to try to fall asleep a second time when he suddenly felt eyes on him. He propped himself up on his elbows, peering into the darkness of the room. No one. And then someone bounced from the far window. John wanted to grab his gun, but all the ammunition was hanging on the wall opposite. He was afraid to stand up. Convincing himself that it was all a mirage, a foolish suggestion, he began to forget himself again. And then a dog's shriek came from the yard. "Elder, Elder," John called out to his neighbor. "Wake up." But only a mighty snore was the answer. His companion slept in complete oblivion. At that moment, there was a banging at the door from outside. Then it opened. Something heavy and slippery tramped across the floor. John struggled to keep from screaming and pulled his coat over his head. He was instantly sweating with incomprehensible fear, a numbness like liquid filling his legs, arms, and chest. A terrible blow tore off the latch. The creature entered the room. Its grunting breath could be heard. With heavy footsteps, it approached the sleepers. John was pounding. He gripped the hilt of his knife frantically. The anticipation of something terrible gripped his will. He closed his eyes, face pressed into his backpack. The creature gripped the edge of his coat with something sharp and lifted it. Strangely, the air it exhaled was very cold. Something sticky dripped onto the heads of the sleeping men. After breathing in their scent a few times, Ono covered the hunters again. When the tension reached its limit, John lost consciousness. He awoke to the cheerful chatter of his companions. They were jabbering and lying smoking. He was too embarrassed to tell them about the night's incident. "That's how they slept," said the older man, seeing John's awakening. "That's what it means to work and stretch. Shall we get up?" They got up, got dressed. They had a snack of stew and breadcrumbs, finished yesterday's tea. They got equipped and went outside. All three of them couldn't hold back their screams. The first thing that caught their eyes was a broken grave. Black clods of earth on the white snow. Next to it lay a dog. Not even the dog itself, but its torn, bloody pieces, scattered 5 meters apart. The whole yard was trampled with terrible, huge footprints. "Let's get out of here," the older man suddenly shouted in a high-pitched voice, and putting on his skis, the first one quickly set off toward the woods. John and Mason followed. That was the end of the story. Several times John tried to return to its solution, talking to archaeologists, to experienced hunters, but he could not find the answer. However, once, as part of a geological exploration party, John flew over those unfortunate places. When the helicopter approached the place where Alexander's grandfather's house stood, he looked down. Instead of the house, he saw a black saucer of ashes. Adam was a pretty good-looking guy. He had great friends and never had a problem with girls. He was in the 11th grade, and he was serious about his studies. His father wanted to send him to England to study, provided that he passed all his exams successfully. From the very first days of school, Adam sat down at his books, and his father hired tutors for him. There were several newcomers to his class, and Adam had not yet had time to get to know them. One day, Alice sat down with him. She was the new girl, and immediately had her eye on him. Everyone was repulsed by her because of her horrible looks. She had crooked teeth, smelled like something nauseating, had unkempt hair, and dressed ridiculously. She was nicknamed Scarecrow because of her hideous appearance. The boy tried not to socialize with her, but she pestered him with problem-solving and sample essays, trying to make conversation. Adam explained to her nicely to get her off his back, and for a while, it helped. At the end of the first quarter, Adam was the top student in his class, and the school held its fall prom on the eve of the first break. All the guys came in suits and the girls in dresses, but not Alice. She came in worn jeans and a gray sweatshirt, which was how she had been going to school for the past 2 months. Adam decided to ask his friend Marina to dance, but as soon as he made a step towards her, Alice appeared and forcibly grabbed his arm and took him to the playground for a slow dance. All the classmates and other kids from parallel classes were looking at them and whispering. Adam noticed this. He knew that after the dance there would be various rumors. It was weighing on him morally. After waiting for the dance to end, he quickly left the assembly hall to go to the restroom for a smoke. Inhaling tobacco smoke, he was able to calm down. His best friend Daniel came in and took out a cigarette and lit it. "She's standing outside the door," he said. I'm not surprised. Dude, you gotta do something about this. There's already gossip about you two. Adam took a drag and closed his eyes and said, "That dance was awful. She smelled like a dumpster." Daniel laughed, but still advised his friend to solve his problem before it completely ruined his reputation, and finished his cigarette and left him alone. Adam decided to get rid of Alice once and for all by having a serious conversation. Coming out of the restroom, she was already waiting for him with a wide smile. The young man offered to walk her home, and she agreed with wild delight. Alice lived on a neighboring street, and as they walked, Adam tried to find words, but nothing came to mind. "Would you, like me to show you my favorite place?" he asked. "Yes," the girl replied hurriedly, and they went into the next doorway of one of the houses. After reaching the attic, they climbed out onto the roof and, walking on it, looked at the city, which was covered with the lights of apartment windows. It was late evening, and the lights were on in all the houses. Adam finally started the conversation. "Alice, this school year is important to me. My future depends on it. I want to finish my studies and take my exams in peace. And I don't want you to bother me with your attention. I also want you to sit apart from me, or if you want, I'll move. But just leave me alone." He looked at her, expecting a response, but she was staring at him intently, almost unblinking. Did you hear what I said?" "No." Adam closed his eyes and sighed heavily with hopelessness. Alice put her arms around him and said, "We'll always be together, and you'll never have another one, ever again. You will not go to England. I will do everything I can to prevent that. You and I are forever." Forever. That was the word that made the guy imagine his horrible future with her. She kept going on and on about their happy life together. But Adam couldn't take it anymore. He took her by the shoulders and started shaking her. "Shut up. There's not going to be an us. I'll be on my own and you'll die alone. No, we'll be together." After saying that, he pushed her away from him, and Alice stumbled down the brick threshold and lost her balance. Adam ran to the edge and looked down. The girl's body barely peeked through the darkness. He quickly climbed down and ran up to the body. She was lying dead. Her head was busted open, and a pool of blood was already darkening beneath her. The boy crouched down beside her on the ground. There was no one around to help. Looking at his blood-stained hands, he realized that he had completely redrawn his life. The boy rushed out of the park. At home, while his parents were away, he washed the blood off himself and waited for the doorbell from law enforcement, but there was none. The next morning, he went online to find information about the girl's death, but there was nothing there either. He went to school early with a rock on his soul. When he entered the classroom, he was speechless. At his desk sat Alice, as if nothing had happened, and her head was fine. They were alone in the classroom. "Your head was busted." Adam couldn't believe that someone could survive, falling from the height of a 12-story building. "I was given a chance." Her eyes were still staring lovingly at Adam. "I'm sorry I almost got you killed." "No, you don't have to apologize now. Why don't you do it on the roof?" Adam was a little surprised, but he had no right to refuse. After sitting through the rest of the class, they went to the roof, the very place where everything had happened a week ago. "Now, you can ask." Alice stood with her back to Adam and looked out over the city. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for what happened, but I don't want you prying into my life. Say it in my eyes." Adam stood in front of her and repeated it word for word. "Was that it?" she asked. "Yes." The girl shoved him hard, and Adam flew down with a scream. Alice walked over, stood on the edge of the roof, and looked at the guy's body. He wasn't moving. Afterward, she shifted her gaze to the sky and said quietly, "Thank you for giving me a chance to take him with me." With those words, she stepped forward.